Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hello everyone, my name is Jeremy, and like the titular hero of today's game, I lead a double life. By day, I'm a mild-mannered geography professor where I mostly teach about geospatial technologies and the environment. But by night, I'm a vigilante crime fighter. Okay, maybe not. I'm just a guy who loves video games. And I want to take some time to talk about one of my favorites, Nightshade for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, Nightshade isn't an unknown game, but it's one that I think deserves more attention from the broader gaming world because it's a fun and unique adventure game, a genre which is rare on the NES. But also it has some really innovative gameplay ideas that I've not seen used in other games much, if at all. The game's an offbeat and funny adventure centered around a vigilante crime fighter that has some traditional point-and-click elements as well as more action-oriented gameplay elements. I was first introduced to the game via Nintendo Power Magazine, as I suspect many people were at the time of release. Volume 34 had a 4-page article on the game with tips and screenshots laying out the overall map of the game world. Based on that feature, my younger brother and I rented it and really loved the quirky tone and gameplay. Some years later, it was my first purchase on eBay, back when eBay was still a fairly new thing. I paid $20 for a complete in-box copy of the game that even included the styrofoam block that used to come in the bottom of NES boxes to keep cartridges from bouncing around. But enough of my nostalgia trip, let's talk about the game itself. Nightshade was developed by Beam Software in Australia and published by Ultra Games in 1992 exclusively in North America. It didn't get a Japanese or PAL territory release. Now, some listeners will already know this, but Ultra Games was one of Konami's shell publishing labels they used to get around Nintendo's limitation of 5 titles per year that a publisher could release for the NES. The game started its development life as a hard-boiled noir detective story, but the developers felt it needed something more, and they changed it to have more comedy elements and not take itself too seriously. As this is a game released later in the NES's life cycle, the graphics are well drawn and the art style is engaging. The music is memorable and sets the mood without becoming obnoxious the way some 8-bit scores of the era could be. Like many adventure games, the narrative is pretty fleshed out, although like many NES games, you don't get all the story from the game itself. The in-game cutscenes do a good job of telling you the important details, but the manual goes into a lot more detail on the backstory. Essentially what's happened is that Metro City had a superhero named Vortex who protected the citizens from crime. But crime bosses, led by the supervillain Sutek, were able to capture and take out Vortex. Mark Gray is an encyclopedia researcher by day, and he's obsessed with following the exploits of Vortex. After Vortex is slain, Mark decides to go out and fight crime on his own to avenge his fallen hero. He becomes his alter ego, Nightshade. But his early attempts at being a crime fighter really aren't going very well, because the gameplay opens with Sutek having tied Nightshade to a chair next to a lit bomb. He leaves you to your certain death, but the player can help Nightshade escape without a scratch. After you escape and explore a series of underground rooms that act as a bit of a tutorial area, Nightshade finally makes it to the city streets, where it becomes clear that he's a nobody. People don't even get his name right, with characters, including Sutek, calling him Lampshade or Nightcart. As Nightshade gains more notoriety by helping people and defeating crime bosses, NPCs in the game will start to give him a little more respect and will assist him in his efforts. The different villainous gangs in the game are a lot of fun. Sutek and his minions follow an ancient Egyptian motif, while another gang is all female ninjas. A third is all human-sized rats, led by King Rat, and another is called the League of Unreasonable Gentlemen. Non-villain NPCs also have a lot to say and often help Nightshade, especially if you can help them first. Your time in the game is primarily spent in the form of a PC-style point-and-click adventure game. Now, this is not the only game in this genre on the NES, but it's part of a fairly small group. Notably, this includes classic ports of games like Maniac Mansion, King's Quest V, another Konami release, and the beloved classic Shadowgate. Nightshade is notable in this group in part because it's an NES exclusive that was never released on other platforms. Unlike a traditional point-and-click adventure game on PC, you move Nightshade around the screen with the D-pad and switch to a cursor to interact with objects and other characters in the game. This is a similar setup to how the King's Quest V NES port handles controls. Maniac Mansion unfortunately sticks to the PC approach of using the cursor to point to where the character should walk, which is much less intuitive when using the NES controller. The world of Nightshade is made up of tiled screens similar to other adventure games, or if you're not super familiar with the genre, think of how the screens in the original Legend of Zelda are tiled. Now, if you are familiar with point-and-click adventures, you're familiar with the idea of pixel hunting, where you're more or less forced to try and investigate every single pixel on the screen to find hidden objects. Thankfully, there's not much of that here, and most of the objects you can interact with are pretty easy to spot. Additionally, when the cursor hovers over an object that can be interacted with, text appears identifying it, which makes this easier to handle than some games in the genre. You can collect items in your inventory and can combine and use them in different places throughout the game to unlock doors, help characters, and escape danger. In addition to the more traditional point-and-click gameplay, the game also has action sequences, which are honestly a bit of a mixed bag. One of the city screens has a burning building with ladders you must climb to save a child from the top floor, all while avoiding the flames. This is a fun experience, but it's the only time in the game this specific mode comes into play, and does make me wish there were a few more unique sequences like this to add more variety. Most of the other action sequences take the form of a genre seemingly opposite to that of the point-and-click adventure game, one-on-one 2D fighting. These sequences are the most contentious part of the game, with some folks who feel like it ruins an otherwise great experience. I disagree, although I can admit that they're pretty clunky. It's hard to deny that they're difficult, and it's easy to lose to even the first combat encounter in the tutorial zone. But given that this is the NES we're talking about, the fighting isn't that bad, all things considered. Fights can sometimes be avoided, but in other parts of the game they're necessary to progress, so you'll have to make peace with it if you want to see all that the world of Nightshade has to offer. As a side note, in the 2000s and 2010s, I was a member of a smallish web forum like all good nerds of the era. One of the other members happened to be part of the development team from Beam Software. After learning this and gushing about how much I loved the game and some of the other titles they had worked on, I learned that one of the game's producers was obsessed with Street Fighter II and demanded that fighting be added to the game. His logic was that fighting games were hot, so this game had to have fighting if it was going to sell. The dev team really didn't want to do this, but the producer was insistent, which is part of why the fighting sequences feel a little out of place. Following the Street Fighter II influence, Nightshade does have a health bar, which is unusual in the world of point-and-click. But in addition to a health bar, he also has a popularity bar. Remember that Nightshade is trying to be a hero to the people, and he needs popularity to gain the public's trust. But because you start the game as a nobody, you have zero popularity, and you have to do good deeds to grow your notoriety with the people of Metro City. You do this through saving the previously mentioned child from the burning building, coaxing a cat down off a tall perch for an old woman, defeating criminals who are menacing the citizens of Metro City, and other various actions that the citizens support. Having popularity is important, not just because characters will stop calling you Lampshade, but because some characters simply won't speak to you if you don't have enough, and you won't be able to complete the game. You will, however, lose some of your popularity when you die. And speaking of death, if Nightshade's health bar drops to zero, whether it's through losing one of the fighting sequences or environmental damage like being hit with hot steam or dripping toxic waste, you don't automatically get a game over. Instead, in keeping with the tone and setting, you're placed in a James Bond-style death trap created by Sutek. Thankfully for Nightshade, these traps can be escaped if you can figure them out fast enough, returning you to the streets to continue the fight. The first 4 death traps can be escaped, but the 5th cannot, which leads to a final game over. All of them are fun to engage with, and it's a clever way to allow players to continue playing. Now, the real reason these sequences are in the game is because the producers didn't want to pay the extra cost that battery backup would add to the cartridges, so there's no way to save your game. The death traps were a creative attempt to give players multiple shots at finishing the game without going straight to a game over. And given the difficulty of the fighting sequences, they're a welcome addition. Regardless of how the traps came to be in the game, I think this method of allowing the player to continue is clever, and I love when games find a way to integrate their mechanics into the narrative like this. So let's say I've piqued your interest and you want to play the game. What's the best way to do so today? The game is over 30 years old at the time of this recording. Well, obviously you can always get an NES cartridge. They seem to be going for around $20 to $30 loose at the moment. or emulate it with a ROM on your computer. There is a licensed PC release you can get on Steam for $9 if you want to stay lawful, but it's essentially just an emulator running the NES ROM. It does allow for save states, with 3 save slots available, but using the keyboard to control the game is a little awkward. Probably the best way to play it right now is through the Nintendo Switch Online NES app. If you're familiar with the game and you're not old as dirt, this is probably how you've come across it. This version thankfully has save states, and the Switch controllers feel much more natural than a keyboard. Now, there was supposed to be a sequel that continued the story, but obviously that never came to pass, which is a shame. With some polishing of the different game components, a sequel could have been a really fantastic experience, whether it had been released on the NES or another platform. Except there kind of is a sequel of sorts. One last interesting note about the game is that the coding for the back end of the adventure system in Nightshade was used as the basis for a later, more popular game, Shadowrun for the Super NES. If you're not familiar, Shadowrun is a platform-exclusive, quirky but beloved isometric action RPG that really stands apart from anything else on the Super NES. The game is based on the tabletop role-playing system of the same name, so it had a bit more brand recognition than Nightshade. But Shadowrun, that's another game for a different side quest. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit about a game I love, and maybe I've inspired you to give it a whirl. It has some fun, unique ideas, and a memorable vibe combining superheroes and villains, noir detective crime fighters, and comedy. It's not a perfect game, and it's a little clunky by today's standards, but if you're into adventure games or retro gaming, you're probably going to find a lot to love in Nightshade. Thanks to Matt and Jeff, the Fun and Games podcast, for the opportunity to talk about one of my faves, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this, you might also be interested in checking out Flashback 64, the chronological Nintendo 64 podcast, where I'm an occasional guest talking about Nintendo 64 games. Thanks so much, and happy gaming.
Welcome to No Small Games, the indie gaming recap and review podcast. I'm Kate, also known as Cater Blossom.
And I'm Emily. You might also know me online as The Specific Egg.
And we met streaming and playing video games on Twitch.
At No Small Games, we combine our favorite genres to experience everything the indie game world has to offer and share it with all of you. We believe there are no small games, only small game studios.
Each episode, we'll choose one indie game that we each played separately and discuss our playthrough experience together.
The good, the bad, and our most memorable moments. We'll follow our recap with a review and announcement of which indie game will be featured on our next episode.
We invite you to play each game along with us and would love to hear from you about your playthrough experience.
Hey, Kate.
Hey, Emily.
I hope that No Small Games brings everyone some big fun.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com